Welcome everybody to this panel from the global to the grassroots, fostering transnational and intersectoral exchange in participatory practices and methodologies. This panel is part of the virtual global outreach conference, Reimagining Our World from Below, Transnational Conversations on Resistance, Movements and Transformations in May 2022. It is organized by the Society for the Study of Social Problems, a US-based association of researchers, students, and practitioners in the social sciences, and it is co-hosted by the Environmental Justice, Climate Justice Digital Hub at University of California, Santa Barbara, USA. And it has been organized by members of the Transnational Initiatives Committee and the Transnational Virtual Initiatives Committee of our organization, SSSP. My name is Eberhard Raithelhuber. I'm a professor for social intervention and transformation at Bertha von Suttner Private University in St. Pölten, which is a small town near Vienna in Austria. And I welcome also my co-organizer, Dolgon, who's a professor of sociology at Stonehill College, Massachusetts, USA, and also past president of our association. I welcome the panelists, the contributors of this panel. We'll have a short individual introduction in the first round. All of them provided a pre-recorded talk, which will be available also in future. It is produced under a Creative Commons license, and it is archived by the Environmental Justice, Climate Justice Digital Hub. This talk is recorded and will also be made available later on. And as participants, you are invited to join our talk by making comments in the chat or asking directly questions. And we try to make sure that we'll pick up them and channel them to the panel members. If you want to engage personally and ask your questions directly, please use the hand-raising symbol and unmute yourself. And if you have questions about our work and conference organizers or want to get in touch, we recommend taking part also in the virtual meetings called Coffee with the Committee. You'll find the details on our website or simply also in the chat where I will post the link right away. You can add your name also to the SSSP Transnational Initiative Committee guest book if you want to receive further announcements about the TIC conferences and events. And you can also provide feedback about the conference, and I post the link in the chat. And also, well, I see that Patty, our chair, has already done it. So in the first introductory round, I now give the floor to our guests and colleagues and speakers. Please tell us and our audience, who are you and where are you based, and how does your work link to the overall topic of this panel? So Antonio, I might ask you to give it a start.
Okay. Well, thanks to Kari and Eberhard for having me here. Hello to everyone for in this panel. I'm very glad to try to share with you what I'm trying to do. And when I read this conference, I found very attractive because I have 3 years trying to connect the notion of diplomacy with social movements with a transnational perspective. So for me, it's very interesting trying to hear new voices or other perspectives that help me to understand better how to connect these kind of notions. Because for me, as you will see, in my work, I have been trying to understand how diplomacy helps to the interest of people, not to the countries or states. So my name is Antonio Alejo. I'm from Mexico City, but I live in the city of Coruña, in Spain, in Galicia, from around 15 years around. I did my PhD here in Santiago de Compostela. Then I stay around here. I went to the Netherlands. I went to the US. I went to Mexico City again, and now I'm here. So I am researching here in a think tank and named IGADI, that is dedicated to study the diplomacy of Galicia, and I am researching in the University of Coruña in a research group dedicated to study the migration and movement and people in motion, I mean. So, what else? As I told you, I focus my research agenda on trying to understand how diplomacy is trying to negotiate, to defend, to communicate and represent people. As I said, no states, no elites, no hierarchies, no elite interest, no commercial interest. So how the people is being part of the global commons, as some presenters we have in this panel, they say. So what I'm trying to do these years is to move my epistemic understanding of diplomacy from state-centric perspective. So from these ideas, I had a lot of ideas about migrant diplomacies, and in this case, urban diplomacies, relating the diasporas from Mexico City to Chicago. So I highlight the idea of Mexico City because I'm not talking about all Mexico, because I'm trying to talk about a translocal dynamic from people from some locality to another locality. So that is important to understand this kind of translocal dynamic, because for me, it's not the same to be from Oaxaca, to be from the Tijuana, or to be from Mexico City, to be from Chiapas. There are a lot of differences that we need to understand, but we're thinking how the diasporas are trying to be part of other locality, as we know, let's say to be New York, Chicago, LA, or Houston, or Arizona. So when I think on this kind of process, for me, it's very important to think this translocality. So we're not talking about only from Mexican people, we're talking about some kind of translocal dynamics for people that are thinking all the time they are part of those kind of cities, other kind of localities. So this kind of diasporas are thinking, are imagining, are creating, are living their everyday lives as a people from two places simultaneously. So for me, the diplomacy that we understand and how we have learned about it, they are not considering this kind of social dynamics. They are always thinking about, as I told you, from a representative state, a negotiatory state, and I communicate the national interest. So for me, when I saw this panel, for me, the very, very important is how do we think the diplomacy from below? How do we think diplomacy for the people that is being exploring for many reasons? They are not part of the wars. They are not deciding the wars. They are not deciding how the economics works. But they are finally the object that receive all these kind of early decisions. So for me, has been very interesting to understand why the people who study social movements, they don't see diplomacy as a relevant topic to understand how to change the global issues around the world. Let me see that this book. This is my PhD thesis. I don't know if you can read it. It's in Spanish. I'm sorry, but it's in Spanish. But it's my first work about this, and I work with Argentinian cases and Mexico cases, and how do they participate as NGO diplomacies in very global issues. So this is my research approach. This is what I say today. And I hope to hear any question or any comment about the presentation. And thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation introduction. And I'll give the floor now to Camila. Please, Camila. Who are you? Where are you based? And how do you link to the topic of this panel?
So hello, everyone again. Thank you. Also want to thank you, Cory, Abby, and also Patty for this organization. I apologize that Professor Patricia cannot be here, but I'm representing her as well. So I'm Camila Macedo Ponte. I am a PhD student at the University of Geneva. I study community-based development in the semi-arid of Brazil. I'm based in Brazil right now because of my field, and because of the pandemics, I just prolonged a lot my stay here. My field research is in Bahia, and I work with youth, the organization of youth in the development in the semi-arid. My background actually is in business administration, and I did my undergraduate studies in Germany. So during these years, I've heard a lot that we needed to, us from the global South, we needed to learn how to be in the same level of the Germans and Europe and so on, and how we should apply the German ways to our business. And regional development was all about business and never about people. So that's when I thought, like, okay, I think I'm not in the right place or in the right path, because I want to know how people are taken into account in this kind of development. And then I moved to development studies. That's when I went to Geneva, and still the European model was very strong. And that's why I'm focusing my studies in the voices of the South and the voices of Latin America and the voices of young people here, precisely here in Brazil. And for this panel, I'm bringing a case, actually it's in Rio de Janeiro, it's not in Bahia, it's related to my work. I have an NGO here. So this case, it's related to my work here in Rio de Janeiro about disaster risk reduction, and how we are taking into account also the voices of those people that very often they're very excluded from the process of thinking policies to risk reduction and so on. So I think that from this background of trying to find a model of implementing the European way in Brazil or in Latin America, I felt like, no, I want that my work and my research serve to our society and to understand that we are already complete. We are not in a way of development to be Europeans in the future. We have already our development. We just have to listen to our voices and stop thinking that we have to achieve what the global North has. So yeah, this is more or less my background, and that's why I'm interested in all this discussion and the real movement, because we talk a lot about community-based development, but sometimes it's only talking. And I want to know how these real movements are happening in the Global South and also the discussions in the Global North. So that's my interest in this discussion.
Thanks a lot for this first pitch. And yeah, I pass on to Noah Cykman.
Thank you. Thank you, the organizers. And now with Camila speaking, I was thinking about, it's interesting that we're talking about organizations from below, and then how it can also be thought in like the global perspective, right? Like if the South is below, and what does that mean anyway? And the geopolitics of what's below and what's above. So that's interesting. And it's something that has been in my mind also. I'm also from Brazil. Maybe the accent is recognizable for some. Now I'm based in California. I'm a PhD student at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I have an MA from the University of Santa Catarina in Brazil when I was studying utopia and social change and utopian practices. And that's how I started to approach this kind of like organizations, like in the cracks of the system, in the margins of the system, and how people are like envisioning a different life that is not the one that the hegemonic dominant system is offering us. And like small groups of people will like have a different vision of what life can look like, and then try to enact that, even if it's in a small scale. But that's happening everywhere, and how these like dots start to connect and networks start to form. And then eventually I realized, like many people are realizing, that climate crisis is like our #1 problem right now. We have like planetary collapse, and the crisis is not just social among humans. It's a crisis among all different relationships that we have established with all sorts of organic and inorganic beings, and with ecosystems as a whole, with the biosphere as a whole, and how all these relationships are cracking in one way or another. And then what responses are also people, humans and non-humans, organizing to provide solutions and responses to these situations. So starting to look at something like maybe ecological utopianism, ecological utopias, or utopian ecologies, when we're trying to regenerate an ecosystem, or when we're trying to create human practices that are ecologically sound and wise. Then how is that working for us and for all those other beings involved? And then 1 year ago, was when I moved to Santa Barbara and joined the Isla Vista Food Forest through the Ecovista Collective. It was, I think it was, I don't know if one of the questions that I think Abby posted for us was about like the relationship between like academic engagement and then activist engagement. And I think it's interesting because I can hardly tell what came first in this case. It's like my whole mindset was ready for it, but it was not my object of study. But after the first day, I went there to a volunteer day to help plant and participate. When I left, my mind started bubbling and I thought like, okay, this is it. Like, this is what I want to study and support and participate in. So it's been like weaving back and forth in that sense. And then in the last year, I've been participating in the coordination of the activities of this project and started to direct my research towards that too. So that's an introduction. Thank you.
Well, I think you already dived into my first question that I wanted just to follow up with. Maybe anyway, you can maybe. Well, I'm curious about, you know, how exactly. Well, let's say what it did to you in the sense of, you know, what you talked about, that you had this kind of experience. So this is the right place, and I also can be here as a researcher or as an activist researcher whatsoever. I guess that you made up your mind maybe at a certain point and asked yourself, so what is it what I can bring to the project, not just as a member, as an ordinary person, you know, but also the knowledge that I might have that others might not have, because it was a highly diverse population that somehow engaged and linked to the project. So what do you think, what is the particular, like, the particular way in which you were able also to give something to the project, maybe from this kind of knowledge, which we might criticize in one way, but also can use also for the goods of others?
Mm-hmm. Well, I have two things in mind. One is the scalability of I think that word is actually used for something else. That's not what I mean. But anyway, like to produce knowledge that will allow this experience to multiply in other places. So that's one of the things that Litsi, who might join us or not, but we've been working on together in like systematizing knowledge about this experience with hopes that we can take it to more places. And Litsi is also an urban planner. So I think that's a very important place to act through right now, that we need like to make cities also like ecologically sustainable, and urban food forests as in what I've been seeing so far, they have like so many potentials to contribute. And then I think academia and academic knowledge and conferences and these like global networks that are already established through this community, I think they can help do these kind of connections and expand, make this knowledge available to be applied elsewhere, and dialogue, of course, also learn from similar experiences. And the second thing is something I've been only recently starting to think about, and it's still, I think, an abstract challenge for me, and I would love to hear if others have thoughts. Something I've been thinking about is in academia, we have feminist thinkers and native theorists talking about relationships with land as a place where all these politics are happening, and how subjugation of women and of native peoples is analog to subjugation of land, and how this reclaiming and retrieving our direct connection with land, where we can like produce food and harvest and meat and use the space however we want. In what ways does that allow us to challenge those systems of oppression, or how does this practice work? Does the fact that we are there doing this kind of practice and connection and activity, does that in itself challenge those systems, or can we do something also more consciously and deliberately in order to promote that kind of political change and social change through the project? So I think, and this is one example, I'm sure there are many other themes that are being discussed in theory and in academia that might be connectable to practice, and then we can weave these connections again between like theory and practice, but I have not figured that out yet.
Well, that's why we are here as a group as well, solve all the problems and questions that we have. And I'd like also to link this to Antonio's work, all the different areas that you worked on, but especially also the relationships between these two localities in the Chicago and the Mexican population from the DF. In your contribution, Diasporas as Actors in Urban Diplomacy, you gave an insight into the development of an emerging urban diplomacy from below, which is pushed by social movements and their activities. And I would like to know a bit more about, the role of research. I mean, you have been describing, observing these kind of movements, maybe more, or at least I suggest, or I consider that it was maybe also from an academical perspective or using academical analysis and concepts. But do we as researchers just take note of such developments that other actors push forward, or what can be our role also as people being connected to these social movements and bases?
Well, in my case, I try to share permanently with these actors to try to figure out how this involvement from diasporas in diplomacy is occurring. Because at the end of the day, they are the actors, and actually, I think in many reasons, I am a diaspora agent too. So for me, it's important to how to express by yourself and as a part of a community, how to try to understand this kind of process. And probably, as Camila said, something similar, but it's very important to try to understand this difference between how could it happen in Europe and how happened in the US, because I am in Spain, and as you know, there is a colonial perspective about Latin America in a very strong way. So there are very challenges to try to understand how Latin American people try to everyday lives in Spain, but the USA too. And in my case, as for Mexico, citizen or Mexican origin, my Mexican origin, I'm interested in understanding how this happened in the US. So I try to compare how it's happening in both cases. But at the end of the day, I found more dynamic, more complexity, more complex processes in the United States with this kind of dynamics of translocal processes. So this is why from my possibilities, I try to share permanently and try to observe and figure out all the activities, all the process that they develop in their places, to try to reinterpret it as a transnational activist to translate into diplomacy. So there's why I work with them, but I work too with as I said, with diplomatic circuits in Mexico and Latin America in some cases, because I didn't say, but I work in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Mexico a few years ago. So I maintain some contact with the circuits of diplomats in Mexico. So when I worked there, I was working first. I was working in the connection between Foreign Ministry of Mexico with civil society in Mexico. So I have this experience from my background. So this is what I'm trying to do when I try to talk with the diplomats and trying to make more sensitive understandings of what is important to involve some kind of this kind of actors in the discussions about the diplomatic negotiations. So it's pretty difficult. I'm very tired sometimes trying to connect both arenas, because as I told you before, I think that both epistemic understandings of diplomacy are very disconnected. And for me, it's very interesting to try to how to refigure, reconsider how it's important for ordinary people to be part of this diplomacy that at the end of the day they are who the agent of these decisions. So this is my perspective when I work with all these kind of processes from diplomats and from activists, these kind of diasporas in the United States.
Thanks a lot also for explaining your relationship also, and also yourself as being part of the diaspora as well, as at the same time as being a researcher. And maybe that connects also well to Camila. Thanks a lot for your very inspiring presentation on the Network for Disaster Risk Reduction in Rio de Janeiro. I'd like to focus a little bit on this network, Ser, which is described in your presentation, in your joint presentation, as a very diverse network with about 140 members, if I'm right, with highly diverse sectors of society, including also researchers. And you describe this network as being a space of trustful relationships, which sounds very nicely in a way, but also my question there is, how do we as researchers fit into these kind of trustful relationships? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Actually, it's a new initiative, and I'm bringing some very first results, or very preliminary, not even results, but what we are observing so far. Actually, the network is formed by people who are inside institutions, but we present ourselves not as representatives of the institutions. We are, well, I'm there like Camila, Patricia is there like a person, not as the professor of the Cefet. We have secretaries of civil defense, we have legal prosecutors, attorneys, and so on. And we have members of community. I think that because we are there as people, as individuals, part of a community, somehow we break the hierarchy that it could be if we could have this, representations of institutions. So I think this helps in building this trustful relationship. So I'm there listening to my neighbor, to a friend, to someone who is victim and part of a problem, like I am. So I think that at the end of the day, the feeling of trust come from this break of hierarchy. Actually, the researchers, how we work there, I mean, as researcher, as part of a civil society organization, I talk about myself. It happens that we use the tools we have to meet the common objectives. So it doesn't mean that, for example, Patricia is a professor from the Federal Institute. She can use the tools that she has there to help to meet these demands of the communities. So one example that I can give is that we are in a process of opening, for example, an extension program inside this Federal Institute that will include communities also in this. It's a program that we are planning to do seminars every month for disaster risk reduction, but taking to the table of discussion also communities. So we are going to put researchers, we are going to bring a government, but also the communities in this very center. What I see here in Brazil is that the academic field is very hierarchized still. So when we open this network as individuals, as part of communities, we kind of break this ice that we have in the institutions. It's a way of finding a crack, like in this very, how can I say, very old shaped institutions. So it's more or less like this, that the researchers present themselves, or the role that they have, like using their tools to serve the needs. And also, like Noah said, the systematization of knowledge is very useful. To take also that, for example, today we are here, like, you know, like academics discussing this network, and maybe it wouldn't happen if this initiative wouldn't be there. So it's a way of bringing the initiatives to other places also.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And yeah, I'd also like to ask a question to Corey before I just open up to a free talk without any questions from my side, at least not the prepared ones. In your introduction to our panel, you started by stating a simultaneity of serious decolonization in academia and at the same time rising fascism. And you asked the two big questions: what does decolonization actually mean? And how should it influence our research, practice, theory, and activism? And then you develop maybe a solution or one path, which is that we must rise our politically engaged praxis roots from an alternative history of social sciences that has always aligned itself with the revolutionary movements. And then you suggest that we should listen to the old voices and maybe read the books. But based on your and also our joint experiences, I know that you now consider also something else to be an indispensable ingredient of such a profound learning and unlearning process, maybe. Can you explain a little bit about your ideas of personal relationships, of compañerismo and vivencia that you link to the work also of Paulo Freire and others in participatory action research, and how we can actually practice this as researchers?
No. Well, you know, I'm reading all this stuff again for the first time, you know, and reading it in reading it in translation and learning about the weaknesses of the translations themselves. And so, you know, I always feel like I need to apologize and thank people when we're in a situation like this and everyone's speaking English. You know, I appreciate you're speaking the language of the colonizer, just so we can participate. And I don't know how important our participation is, but I like to think that at my age, I have something to offer. You know, I think that the reason that, you know, after all these years of doing academic work, you know, I come back, you know, to these ideas of relationships is because I think that the academy spends much of its resources and efforts at decoupling us from almost everything, right? We become alienated from our knowledge. We become alienated from our teaching. You know, faculty around the world have less and less control over what they do and how we do it. And so, you know, there's this growing fascism that we see in the kind of elite of the maybe I can take care of in the elite of a kind of Putin-esque axis of people. But you know, we can't ignore the fact that fascism has been around for a long time, and it's really steeped in neoliberalism itself. And so, you know, we could talk about what is real fascism. I'd suggest we've been, you know, living with a various form of it for quite a while. And, you know, we see breaks in the fascist bloc itself when we watch, you know, NATO and Putin go at it. But for me, what that means, right, is that we're constantly fighting against this battle of trying to maintain our dignity and our integrity and our autonomy. And the institution of academia gives us a false sense of that all the time. And, you know, my feeling about relationships is that for me, it's become the solution to the problem. And the solution is who I work with, you know, where I work, and the kinds of relationships I want to help create around me, which have to do with recognizing that the real power to make changes is going to come from below. And it's not a new idea. I'm more the messenger than I am the innovator. But I think that what I see my role in this conference, this panel, is part of that movement, is to find the people who have been taking on this struggle for a very long time, but even more importantly, newer people who are working on their doctorates and engaged in this work and passionate about these connections, and suggesting that that it's possible. Maybe it's inevitable, you know. Maybe the utopian thinkers had something to offer. You know, I'm neither religious nor utopian, but I think that in this process of rebuilding these connections to create the kind of power, both in knowledge creation and in social movements, we will find the answers to what kind of vision for not only academic work, which I think in the end is relatively minimal to this process, but certainly useful, you know, where we hope the institutions of the future lay. I think, to me, I'm so excited about these three different presentations, if I can kind of move from my answer to your question to, you know, not necessarily question, but, you know, one of the things I think I've learned is that there are no particular answers, and that so many of us who do this kind of work are struggling to kind of find the right place, you know, find the right project, find the right formation for that project, find the right interaction of people and researchers and agencies and institutions. And I think that, you know, it's exciting to see different ways that not only the research is being carried out, but also the way it's evolving. And so I think if I had a question for all of the other three presenters, it's fascinating to see what you've done. And I'm wondering if even in the process of presenting here and putting your thoughts together here, some of you working with co-authors and collaborators, what do you see next? Like, where do you see your work going next? And maybe the you is part of that work. You know, who are you in that process? See, this is why I hate teaching on Zoom. And I'm not teaching, I realize, but I ask questions and expect people to answer, and everybody's just looking at me. So I don't, Antonio, maybe you first. We'll go in order of letters.
I will try to say something about what's next for me. I don't know what's about diplomacy. Well, about diplomacy, it's very interesting that at the maybe from the last 10 years, I have found a very new literature about how diplomacy is pluralizing, how diplomacy is opening, is more inclusive. So we can find actually a very important research that is trying to rethink how do we think cities, how do we think migrants, how do we think any kind of actors and agencies that are trying to develop their own diplomacy. And I think that's very interesting. Actually, the question for you, Carrie, I don't know if I do it right now or maybe later, I don't know. But well, but for me, I think that, for example, I think it's pretty tired try to share this kind of discussion, because at the end of the day, for example, the last week I was in Lhasa, in the Congress, in the Congress of Lhasa. And our discussion at the end of the day, when I present something about every diplomacy in motion, a case from migrants in Italy. They are working on a migrant tour. They are some kind of organization that they are organizing some kind of intercultural tours in big cities like Milan or Rome or something, and they are trying to show the cities from other perspective, not from tourists, traditional tourists. They are trying to share those areas or those kinds of lives that are not the classic tourists that we know. Well, when I finish my presentation, our discussion says, well, how do your research and connect with the mainstream of diplomacy. At the end of the day, how do you influence? How do you try to challenge, or what do you say to the traditional diplomacy? Maybe if you don't say nothing, maybe what you're saying is not relevant for them, because I know that there is no relevant for them. So probably you are working from a margin, from a marginal perspective. And at the end of the day, it's not working for the challenge of diplomacy. From how do they actually currently say or seen? So for me, it's pretty tired, pretty difficult. How do you connect this kind of discussion? But I like a lot. I like a lot trying to figure out how to rethink this kind of content, and I like to see how difficult it is for many people trying to understand how diplomacy could be important for the people, for the everyday lives. And it is very important to figure out some kind of actions. Actually, I am organizing some kind of course in Mexico City online to call Social Innovation and Diplomacy. This is a course oriented to NGOs, to academics, to some public servers that want to learn about how to introduce to the world of diplomacy from a non-state perspective. So for me, this is the challenge. What's next? But I think next is working in what do I like. So try to figure out the better way to share it, to learn from others, and then probably sometime in a few years we can find a more sophisticated thinking of diplomacy, more than words, more than liberal perspectives, more than commercial perspectives. And I think it's important to keep working in these kind of lines. Yeah. That's it.
No, that's great. Noah, I know that you have to go soon, so maybe, and then I'll come back after Noah and Camila answer that to try and see if there's a question that I can answer from Antonio. Noah.
Thank you. So what's next and collaborations, right? Yeah, I think they're definitely related, at least for what I see happening here at our project at the Food Forest. Start with the collaborations, which is expressed, I think, in our video. It's really interesting how we can combine our different knowledges and how all these different knowledges are needed. So I'm a sociologist, and Litsi is an engineer and urban planner, and Tony is an ecologist. He's the one who designed the food forest and has all the technical knowledge and skills and how nitrogen flows, etc. And we don't really know how the food forest itself works, but then we look at I look at like the social relations that are implied there and social change that it's bringing and how it relates to broader systems, the food system and justice, etc. And then Litsi also looks at all this and also has the look of an urban planner, how this nature-based solution can be used in urban planning to make cities, this and that. So I think that the collaborations are crucial to make the project happen and to take it to to develop its different potentials. It's also very fun to collaborate. We're learning with each other all the time, a lot. Also, next steps include, can share and celebrate with you that yesterday we had the first educational day at the Food Forest. We had 2 different groups coming over, one of students from the university and one of pre-teenagers from Wilderness Youth Project, which is an NGO. So that's definitely one of the next steps we want to keep developing, make it like a site that it has its goal in itself, like produce food and have a forest in the city and food on public land, and then also make it a space for education on the ground and to bring people to have the experience of this contact and learn about the place, etc. And that is related to the collaborations, because then again, like all the different knowledges are part of different educational agendas that are all very valuable in my opinion. Hopefully at some point, like some bigger event, bring all of you and people from other urban farms and urban food forests and urban planners and exchange about that, plan the global revolution. And and then there was something else I wanted to say, but I'm forgetting it now. So I think I'll leave it there.
Well, if we plan the global revolution, I think that's the most important point, maybe. Together.
Yes, I agree.
Camila.
Sorry, I thought that you wanted to talk first, but what's next? What I envisage, what I hope is that the way I'm invited and the way I feel, how can I say, entitled or ready to occupy places that I didn't feel before, or that I wasn't invited before. I wanted that those people that I work today that are not invited to occupy these places can take these places, and I can share much more the spaces of, I cannot say production of knowledge, because everyone is producing knowledge every time, but this kind of hierarchical or mainstream production of knowledge. I want these barriers to be more soft, maybe, and that the way I'm invited, I want that those people I'm working with also can be invited to occupy, and that we can hear other voices and talk other languages in those places. For me, that's the most important. I'm working in two projects, two different projects of participation, and as I said, and for me, it's how can I say, it's very motivating to see how things are really changing in Brazil. You know that we are facing a very hard period right now, and it's not only resistance. We are like ending this government, and it's like we are in the fourth year of a very how can I say, a very difficult period for us. But it's not only resistance. We see that we are also managing to make other ideas flourish and bloom in difficult times. So, and it's because of the organizations of those people, very, very local, and it seems small, but it's not small. I think that little by little, we start to change these oppressive structures. And that's what I envisage next, maybe to have more people, for example, that this open discussion that we have here will be more populated with the people that are part of our networks and so on, and that they feel also ready to talk and to be part of it. That's what I want next.
Cynthia, you have a question.
Yes, I do. Sorry, I missed a little bit of the meeting because I had to run errands a little bit. But anyway, I think I heard most of the presentations and most parts of the different, the three presentations, and that's wonderful. I understand this is about applied research in terms of methodology. So applying, sociological ideas about equality and everything is very important. And I have very limited knowledge on this. Seems to me in terms of, so basically you have some ideas and then you go to the community and involve the community to be part of the research. And then maybe some evaluations will be done at the end of the research to see whether the original purposes have been achieved. So that's part of it. So I think another part of it, if I heard correctly, is that the engagement of the community in the research project is very, very important, because after all, the purpose of such research is to serve the community and to give people voice. And so my question is, number one, when you have this idea to engage the community, how do you select different concepts and theories and other aspects of life, basically, your own experiences of other people and things like that, to apply to this, research project in hand. And secondly, when you go through the project, when you run into problems, what do you do? And then at the end of the project, how do you evaluate, how much of the original purposes has been achieved? Like the community has really benefited from, this project of raising their voices, networking, or their food production for whom, and things like that. So those are my questions, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Cynthia. Those are great questions. I'm going to ask if Noah would start, because I know that she's to leave in a few minutes, so maybe she has something to offer first.
Sure. Well, to be honest, these are questions that are always in my mind unanswered, and I guess that's important in itself. I'm constantly asking myself, what is exactly the role of academic knowledge in the project, and how can we make this kind of knowledge useful? And some of the things I mentioned earlier are like some products of these reflections, and trying to find ways in which it can be relevant to the project. But I do think that, the operating practical aspect of the project will be primary. I think that's the word. Maybe a bit of a Marxist view here, which is not my typical one, but I think that that's the main part. And in that sense, I feel like part of my ethics in being a researcher there is that I am more an activist there than a research, at least so far. That will probably have like oscillations through time. It will not always be like this, but my first engagement from the beginning was as an activist, and still is. I think I dedicate more hours in my week to the project, to the practical aspect of the project, than I do to my theorizing about that. I think that also some very practical ways that we might be able to do this kind of like bringing back, like not doing extractivist research, is using academic grants and finding funds that can be brought to the project. That's, the most basic way, I guess, and try to find ways to directly compensate people that are offering knowledge to us. Another way that is very practical, and we did it for the panel, Litia and I are currently engaged in doctoral projects and researches, and Tony is not in academia, so we interviewed him, but we considered him just as much as an author, maybe more than us, right? He's the one telling the whole story of the food forest, so we made a point of him being also considered as an author in an equal position, which I find something very, it seems so basic, but at the same time, it's not the norm, right? Like we have so much like interviews and like extraction happening, and not even like giving credit to these people, like not even naming them in there. So I think we're doing so bad, generally speaking, that even the smallest actions, they're meaningful and important. And then how to go beyond that, I think, is like the open question of constant asking ourselves, and like constant invention of ways to discover how to bridge these gaps. It's sometimes I feel it's sabotaged from the start. If we look at the history of like what is a university, right? It is an institution that came with colonialism, that brings a hierarchy of knowledge embedded, that has a lot of racism, injustice, and problems like intrinsic to it. So it's I think like all other struggles, right? We have to be anti-racist, otherwise we're just racist, and we have to be feminist, otherwise we're just chauvinist, and we have to be all the time like revising our behavior as researchers, otherwise we'll be being extractivist and so on. So I think these are important questions. I'll be curious to hear what others have to say. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. I can see that you did put a lot of effort in this. Thanks. Yes.
Camila or Antonio?
Yeah.
I can maybe. One interesting thing, because Noah was talking about actually putting the people where they are, not only I interviewed, and sometimes this person, not sometimes, but most of the times they are authoring with us every time. And there was a curious fact in one of the meetings of this network, that one person said, "Oh, it's so good to see researchers and authors talking, because I thought all those people were dead, and I see that you exist." And for me, I think the interesting thing is like when we develop now with the network, when we say that we are going to develop seminars, and people think that it's seminars, it's things for researchers and so on. And when we bring everyone to this and to the table and say like, now you are going to expose what you're seeing, your experiences, your knowledge, and how you see this problem. So I'm kind of demystifying, how can I say, this kind of you're authors, you know, like in a kind of a semi-god or something like this. No, I am author myself too, so I'm here too in this space. So that's what we are trying to do, to bring those people also to talk about their stories, and to see that they are authors too, and they are producing knowledge every time with us as well.
Yeah, so research can be also built on your work as well. Okay, thank you. Right.
Yeah, well, in my case, I say a few years ago, I worked with indigenous communities in Mexico, so in Chiapas or Oaxaca, and we learned that we need to create confidence with them, to try and to create some kind of collaborative research. So since then, I have maintained this kind of attitude when I'm working with any kind of group or community, try to create some confidence and try to maintain some apparent dialogue between this idea of academia and the community. So in this paper I present here, actually, when I work with diasporas, I approach with them, as I said before, first as one of them, and second one, not as a victim. I understand them like agents of transformation of these societies. So I try to design and trying to keep my connections with them as an agent to transform the realities where they are acting. So I never trying to ask them how do they suffer. I know probably some people are suffering, but what I'm trying to maintain in our interactions is that any person in any part of the world has the right to be where they are, and there are no reason to ask something different. So this is my first attitude or strategy that I try to work every day when I'm working with the diasporas. The second one, when I work with diplomats, I try always maintaining that it's very important to keep the open spaces for any actor. So when I want to interview some diplomat, or while I'm working some kind of observation in this kind of spaces, I try to, when I have the opportunity, I try to say that do not forget that we need to maintain the space open, and we need to be more inclusive for any kind of actors. And the third one, I try to keep always available to any share or any talk or any dialogue that probably when I am working with it, I can be there. So this is my third attitude. My third action that I try to maintain permanently positive with anyone. So when I'm talking with anyone, I try to actually in my WhatsApp or in Gmail, or so I can be anytime. Even as you know, I'm working with the USA in USA with Mexican community in USA. So I try any hour. If it for me is 3 or 4 a.m., I try to, if I am awake, I try to answer at this moment. So I try to maintain permanently in contact with some kind of communication about what I'm doing, about what I'm doing them. So that is how I work with the community I'm working with.
So really to show that you respect them and you respect their perspectives, make yourself available to be part of them, you know, to spend a lot of time with them. Okay, thank you.
That's it.
Antonio, I'm guessing that you dress differently. when you're speaking,
yeah, I have.
When you're speaking to diplomats.
Yeah. No, oh, sorry.
When you speak, I imagine when you're speaking to diplomats, you're dressing differently than when you are talking to people in the streets.
I tried, but sometimes I failed. It's not easy.
Well, I raise that, half in jest, which is generally most of my jokes are really half jokes. So much of this process that we're talking about is trying to kind of find our way, and so, when Noah talks about the inevitability of, settler colonialism and now neoliberalism within our institutions, and Camila says, breaking down those barriers, right, and really demystifying the idea of being an author, or having a seminar, this is where we are. We're somewhere in between, this constant being ensconced in institutions of higher elite knowledge production, or speaking with people who have political power in government places, to working with people in, in the streets or in communities, poorer communities, and maybe being more or less embedded. Maybe it's even our neighborhood. Maybe we've lived in these communities. Maybe we're living there now, but we're always trying to, navigate power and the structures of power. My feeling about diplomacy as a concept, Antonio, is that I love the mission to redefine, right, to re-envision. And its success, right, will not be yours in the end to determine. It will, the success of your work will be, does it in fact really enable this kind of power change? And I hope so. And I hope I find myself using this concept in the future. But the thing I wanted to mention, a couple of us know of the work of Francisco Longa and his work in Buenos Aires. And he's writing a piece now on something he calls all-terrain movements. And his idea is that, there are ways in which long-term social organization and social movements evolve. And in particular, the one he's talking about that he's engaged with for many years is a group that was mostly extra-governmental. It was mostly self-organized and self-activity, and really about how do we provide, and especially during COVID, how do we provide what this community needs, this very, very poor community? How do we do this on our own? But over the last 10 years, they've become increasingly, more involved in local politics. And in fact, there are people who have come from their movement who are now in political offices and have been elected. And so now, how does this kind of movement evolve to be all that it has been and now all that it seems to be? And what are the, there are obviously struggles and dilemmas and things of that sort. But I think in some ways, that's what we all have to do. We all have to be as nimble as possible when it comes to not only our theory, but our praxis, right? We need to be as nimble as we can be as we keep in mind this grassroots instinct the instinct to know that knowledge and power for the kinds of change we might envision will come from below, but that we also can't ignore the kinds of research that lets us know what is power doing and how does it work. And so there are places for lots of different kinds of research to answer Cynthia's question as well. But I think in some ways it's the motivation and it's the framework for inquiry and discovery, right? And I think in some ways we're all starting from this framework in which some of the most important, if not the most, ultimately the most important knowledge is coming from our connections with these communities. Eberhard.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to add something. When I just remember talks with a social movement organization of indigenous peasants in the state of Oaxaca, to which I'm linked, have been linked for 25 years now. What I learned from them is that sometimes when we talk about, well, let's call it fighting the system or liberating ourselves from many things, that especially within a Western view, we think that things are achievable in a quite short time. We normally have the means, especially this middle class, people with a kind of welfare structure around them. We have an idea of how we can achieve things and what's achievable within what kind of time or time frame. But they taught me that they are decolonizing themselves or have been decolonizing themselves and struggling for more than 500 years now. So how would we think that we're gonna break down the existing colonial system of knowledge in academia just within a project? We should not. And what I learned from Camila's presentation, I hope I'm right, is that the network that you were able to found and be a member of, that you built on the struggles and other social movements around them. So there was already something that was growing or had been growing maybe sometimes, but still left some traces. So these kind of ancestors in a way, or precedents, they're fundamental for us also. And we should not only acknowledge those authors like Tony, for example, in Noah's video, who did the camera work, not only the camera work, but for this presentation, but we should honor also those generations before us. I think that's very important. Yeah.
And can I? And also our predecessors and also our own mistakes. Actually, the network, it was built after one seminar we did. We organized, and it was a very shame that we put actors in disaster risk reduction, but there wasn't in the panel people from communities. It was government, it was civil society organizations, it was the federal prosecution and so on. But the community luckily the community was attending to the event. And it caught us the attention, and everyone was working already with those communities. And it's a very shame. So when we give one step ahead, one step forward, we think, well, okay, that was a mistake and we can be better. And how can we be better and to include all those people in every step we do?
I don't know how to do the electronic hand raise, so I'm just going to jump in. One of the things that in my mind that's been connecting and listening to all of the people on the panel, and this is going to come from a weird place, so just hang in there with me. Everybody has a novel, they say, sometimes in your brain, and I have a novel in my brain. And that novel is what the hell would what good would a sociologist be in a post-apocalyptic world? Like if things really did blow up and it was all over and we're all trying to just survive. I don't know how to cook, much less farm. and I just don't have a lot of skills that I think of as being good skills in this post-apocalyptic world. So my novel is this character who is trying to teach everybody why it died. And basically, I'm just the person running around going, well, let me tell you why it didn't work, and let's try again. But I bring that up because it seems to me that one of the questions that we have as sociologists when we look at and get embedded, if you will, in specific problems in specific locales is exactly what are we bringing to the table with our sociological training and so forth. And I want to suggest one thing that I think I'm hearing in most of these presentations, and that is that we bring, for lack of a better way of putting it, a sociological imagination, that we have, the training that we have helps us connect the dots in a way that people who have not studied some of the things that we have studied would immediately see. And that sometimes is welcomed and useful and sometimes isn't. So I'm not suggesting that we should just run around going, look, this is all connected. But I do think that it helps in reproducing some of these projects and moving forward to saying, okay, so we've done this here in this space, and how can it help spread to other spaces? Because oftentimes what happens, and I think Corey was talking about this a little bit, or no, wait a minute, Abby was talking about this a little bit with how something moves from a non-governmental, it was Corey, a non-governmental system to it becomes more governmental, more embedded. And what do we do now in terms of a change in the movement and that kind of thing? And I think all too often in one locale, we come up with a really good idea that grows from the bottom up. And then the idea is to transport it to other places. And I talked about this a little bit in one of the earlier sessions, so Cynthia's probably heard this before, but it seems to me that what we uniquely maybe have is the ability to identify the process as much as the outcome, so that we can show that that it needs that grassroots, it needs that community, it needs to be growing from the bottom up. So when we want to take this thing that works here and move it to this other location because people have called up and said, gee, this is working where you're at, how can we make it work here? That instead of saying, well, we figured out A, B, and C, we would say, oh, well, what you need to do is start with, these are the mistakes that we made, but start with this kind of grassroots, right? This kind of communication, invite these kind of people to the table. Make sure you don't make this mistake or the other mistake that we made, but let it grow from the bottom up, instead of let's take the conclusions that we got from this growth and impose it on this new situation. So I think that's, I hope, I guess is what I'm saying, that sociologists have something to bring to the table, and that aspect of it, that we can actually identify the how something gets done within a social movement, not just the what of that thing. And that might be a place for research too, to understand the how.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I learned a lot from all these talks. Yes, I think process has to be researched and learned and applied as well. Because it's a different setting, the same outcomes and everything we strive to achieve probably will not be the same with the same process. And so, yeah, that is very, very important. I think, maybe a good starting point, if like me or anybody else who is interested or in applied research, including, I think, something that is not applied, but like participant observation, will be to understand the people you want to learn from. So then maybe by experimenting a little bit, learning from your own mistake, as well as trying to learn from others' projects, hopefully, it will be a good project. Thanks.
I have to say that part of this conversation for me is a reminder that we really need a journal for failed experiments. The scientific process is so beholden on mistakes, yet, it's really hard to publish. So I'd love for someone to take up the challenge of a new publication that allows us to talk about all the mistakes we made without making it harder for us to get grants, right? The other thing I wanted to say though, Cynthia, is I think that we have all too long thought of applied research in too instrumental a way. And I think that, what's so exciting to me about all three of these papers is this notion of not just getting together with a group of people because you have a research interest or project, but really trying to get together with people as part of a community of similarities and differences, and working through that as part of a process of trying to make the world a better place. And in that process of figuring out how to make the world a better place, lots of different research questions emerge, right? As do the proper methods, and as does who carries them out. And so, to me, that's turning that notion of applied research in some ways on its head. And the last thing I want to say, getting back to the mistakes, is, I love the anecdote, Camila, because it's, it rings true to me, for so many different projects I've been a part of, and what you think you're doing and what you're actually doing. And, to me, the real strength of your story is that, you did learn from that mistake. And I'm sure there are people from the community who enlightened you about that mistake. And that's when the real amazing process of, this kind of participatory action research, whatever name we give to it, comes from. It comes from realizing the ways in which, even in our best intentions, we still recreate structures of power. And when we, and we should always be living that dilemma, in a sense, where on the one hand, we want to demystify seminars, authorship, all the different things that we think are so important. But on the other hand, we're constantly trying to demystify their actually place of importance. And so we want to have a seminar because of what it represents, but we don't want to have a seminar because a seminar is the way that one learns, right? And so how do we navigate between those? I think that, that's got to be uncomfortable for us to some degree. And it's got to keep us asking all of these questions all the time as we do this research.
Thanks.
Thanks. Ebby, do you want to close out? Are you ready to
Oh,
wrap?
no, I just wanted to add something, although this maybe was already a conclusionary word from your side, but I just wanted, I wanted to pick on what it was Noah or Camila, I'm not sure, talked about before, maybe Noah. Yes, I mean, I think what is necessary for us, I mean, we are researchers in the sense of that we are based in research or doing our doctoral studies right now for achieving some kind of degree and also having a legitimation for what we do and maybe even earn something, which is not too bad to have. Yes, but and we also have to produce outcome in the sense of, what makes us stay in the system, what makes us, receive our check every every month, which is harder and harder these days, especially for young people, younger in the sense of earlier in their career. But still, I'm almost 50 now. I got my first unlimited contract right now, and I'm not sure how long it will last. So I think definitely we need currencies. We need value in a sense of, the question is just where do we produce it and what kind of value do we actually produce? And I think what we try with this conference is to show that we can do things that we like, that we think are important, to have the different ways of reimagining not just one world, but our different worlds from below. And from below, I think in the idea of our conference organizing group, this is not just below in the sense of the global south. It is below from many aspects in that sense. As we also use the word our worlds, to make the plurality very clear. Finally, I think we did this year for the first time right now to try to bring people together and produce this in a sustainable way, which means like this recording will be online for I don't know how long. The net, we all know that the internet does not forget and not forgive maybe as well. This is the first step, and you are right when you say that actually next time the practitioners, the other people, the other actors of the practices that we are part of, need to be on board here, definitely. I mean, this is the next step that we have to go, and maybe we have to go beyond the seminar structure or whatsoever, what just Corey said, and achieve and open up other spaces and blur the boundaries of these institutions of power and knowledge. For sure, we do have to do that. We can do it. I mean, we still have some resources. We got some resources to do this conference, and we can go on. And I'm pretty sure that we will be we will bring about and maybe profit from others who also took the same road. But I think we will be able to do something better than what we were able to see when we were younger, in the sense of, I think there is also to learn from the past and also from the books that Corey mentions in his presentation, definitely. Yes, but we right now know what we do not have to repeat, and we have to build our own currencies and our own future, definitely.
Thank you, Evie. Antonio, you had your hand up, and then maybe Evie can wrap us up.
Well, I want to ask to Corey, because I don't want to leave without asking something. How do we think diplomacy from the colonized perspective? Probably it's too late to answer this question, but probably you can say something.
No, I can. I think, well, from a colonial perspective or a decolonial perspective, because I think decolonial perspective. Yeah, because I think diplomacy. I think the challenge that you have for me conceptually is that diplomacy, as we understand it, as it was constructed, was always a colonial project, and so so we extract from diplomacy what we think is is useful, is even desirable, right? Because we think of diplomacy, well, how in fact do we engage in global conflict without killing one another? So, we want there to be a diplomacy where we can actually, negotiate power and identity and other things without, without, say, violence. Many people would probably say many things that have come under the guise of diplomacy have been violent anyway. And so I think from a decolonial perspective, what we want to do is say, can we extract from diplomacy what we think is a kind of unassailable good? Can we think of diplomacy in the sense of how we encourage people to work together without the kind of already overarching sense that one group is more powerful than another, one group can enact their will if in fact talks break down, kind of thing. So, I believe in conflict, in, alternative conflict resolutions, right? So what does that really mean in practice? In practice, it's somewhere between, new ways for people in power to, enhance their hegemony through, conversation as opposed to jail, and other ways that we really do create ways in which people can talk to one another and try to come out with a solution that in fact is good for everyone without people feeling violent or abused. So I guess that it's a long, short answer, but ultimately, again, I think what we come up with will be less important with what.
A start point. It's a start point.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Evie,
yeah, I can.
take us home, brother. Take us home.
I can only, as one of the co-organizers together with you, I think we all, the two of us, can only thank all of the contributors with their individual presentations and talks, as well as their presence today for discussing with us very important topics. I felt close to you in many ways, and I learned from you as well, from the pre-recorded talks, as well as from like having a live discussion with all of you, including the audience or those who have not supported by a contribution, but supported by their presence and their discussions today. Our panel has the title From the Global to the Grassroots. We talked a lot about the grassroots and how we link in, how we can engage there, and what we can extract there, what could be the good that we can do maybe for that. I think one of the open questions for me, not unresolvable, but one that is not still clear for me at least, is all the questions of scaling. How do we expand, transport, scale all the knowledge that we have? I think there were some ideas that we have, and Antonio also talked about this, what we can bring to other places, how we can keep them open, how we can make them accessible to different people, but still the question of the global, of moving up from the grassroots, if there is a up movement anyway, maybe we have to think also in different spatial categories here. But still, I think this is a big issue, how we can expand and become more powerful in that sense, not as individuals, but the ideas and the experiences and the knowledge that we gain also from the engagement with the grassroots. Maybe this is part of another conference, another talk, another day. I thank all of you for being with us today. I hope you stay in contact. Please visit our website during these days that we will have some kind of live events, but also later on, if you want, visit the archive at the end. And please get in touch, look our names up, and let's engage with each other in other occasions, and also engage with all the other people who were not present here today, with whom we so much like to work together. So goodbye to everybody, and thanks for being with us.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, take care.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, stay in touch. Bye.